Okay, in this talk I will show you how to install RPT from the files that you downloaded. I assume that you know how to unzip the files and you can then navigate to them. Okay, now that I've got the installation files downloaded and unzipped, I navigate to the IM launcher for Windows and in the RPT setup directory, and that kicks off IBM's installation manager. And from there I can install RPT. In this case I'm not going to install the license key administrator. I usually run that remotely, or I use a shared one. And so I select the IBM Rational Performance Tester and say Next. And it's setting up, and it warns me that I should install the license key administrator, but it's not required, so I'm just going to skip that here. Get to the license agreement, read that carefully as always, say Next. It gives you a place where you give your choice where you want to install to. Picking the default, and I'm saying 64-bit because I'm running on a 64-bit operating system. You have the option of installing into an existing Eclipse IDE, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to install a separate version of Eclipse. I'm picking English as my language, selecting Next, and then I look at the options that are available. You can usually get away with taking the defaults, but I usually deselect Telnet 3270. For example, I'm not doing that, so I just deselected it. Makes the installation size a little bit smaller. And then I say Next. And it asks you about your license server. I'm going to talk a little bit more about licensing later because it's a really confusing area, difficult area. In this case, it's I'm saying that I'm going to use a remote one to run virtual users. Click Next, and it says, do you want to download the help or run it from the web? I always say run it from the web. And then it tells me here's what I said I was going to install. You can to change your mind, and you say install. Now while this is running the install, this is going to run for a while. Let me talk about licensing options. There's two types of licensing. I call them install license and a runtime license. The RPT official term is the IM activation license, and the Rational Common Virtual User licensing, or Common VU licensing. The install license is something that says you're authorized to install the workbench. You can do it one of two ways. You can get a file that is a licensing file, and I typically do that. Or if you have shared licensing, so that you're sharing a set of licenses with your team, then you run that install license from a licensed server, and you don't set up a file with your licensing information. As far as running virtual users, you always run from a licensed server. So two types of license: install license and a run license. One is typically a file, the other is you point to a licensed server, and the way you point to the licensed server
is port at server name.
So this install will run for a bit. All right, now that the installation is done, let me talk about a couple of things about the Installation Manager. So I'll go to Run Programs and Run IBM Installation Manager. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the repositories where you install programs from. So if you download an update, first of all, you find this under File Preferences, Repositories. And when you get an update or even an installation of something that gets installed with the Installation Manager, it comes with a file called repository config, and what you need to do is add that repository on this screen, point to the repository config, and then select it, and then Installation Manager will look inside that repository for any software updates. Related to that is if there are none selected, it'll go to the web to see if there's any updates on the web. So if you don't have anything checked here, it'll just see what the latest updates available for your programs. The other thing that's interesting here is you select the updates option, and there's a checkbox there that says automatically check for updates to the Installation Manager when you start it, and that's worth checking. Set your preferences to get updates from the web. You can then say search for updates. It will find the latest updates, and you can then select and install them. It's usually not a bad idea to install any fixes once you install your base level of code.